At a glittering high society gala, a shocking insult shatters the room. A billionaire white family flaunts arrogance in front of hundreds of guests. But the black woman CEO they targeted stands calm, her silence more powerful than their cruelty. The night ends with an unexpected cliffhanger hinting that everything will soon flip. Know your place. Woman, don't forget who owns this room. The words crack through the hall louder than the crystal glasses clinking on silver trays. Guests froze mid-laughter, forks dangling in mid-air above plates gilded in gold. The ballroom was a cathedral of power marble floors shimmering beneath chandeliers, gowns sweeping across velvet carpets, and men in tuxedos whispering numbers bigger than empires. And at the very center stood Evelyn Carter, the youngest black woman, CEO of a Fortune 100 company. Her posture was regal, spine straight, eyes calm. A diamond brooch pinned to her midnight blue gown caught the light, flashing like a silent weapon. Across from her, 3 generations of the Harringtons, the billionaire white dynasty that had shaped Washington politics and Wall Street, alike hovered like predators. The patriarch, Richard Harrington Sr., silver hair combed back like steel wire, had just let those venomous words slip past his lips. His voice echoed with the entitlement of centuries. The crowd didn't gasp, they swallowed their shame instead. That was the rule at these galas. Silence feeds power. Evelyn did not flinch. Only her right hand moved graceful fingers adjusting the strap of her clutch. A symbolic motion. Quiet dignity. Then, before anyone could even blink, Richard Harrington's son stepped forward. Thomas Harrington Jr., tall, golden-haired, face flushed with the arrogance of someone who'd never heard no in his life. His voice thundered. "You dare walk in here, acting equal? Our family invited you into this circle, and you repay us with defiance?" And then the slap. His palm struck Evelyn's cheek with a sound that cut sharper than the orchestra's strings. A hush fell over the gala. Every chandelier seemed to tremble, every wine glass shook, and the weight of centuries of humiliation replayed in one cruel act. Evelyn staggered not from pain, but from the audacity. Her heels dug firmly into the marble. Slowly, she straightened, her eyes burning steady, not with rage, but with something far more dangerous. Composure. The Harrington family smirked, mistaking her silence for submission. Their arrogance was complete, but the room felt it. The hush wasn't mere politeness now. It was the electricity of history bending toward something about to break. Some guests looked away, shame tightening their jaws. Others stared, wide-eyed, as if waiting for Evelyn to shatter or rise. Richard Sr. leaned in, his words like acid whispered into the hush. "Remember this moment, Miss Carter. Your billion-dollar deal exists because we allow it. Without us, you're nothing but a guest in a borrowed gown." Evelyn lifted her chin, the faint red mark on her cheek glowing like a brand. Her voice, when it came, was soft. Almost too soft for the marble hall. "I built an empire from ashes," she said. "And you think I need your permission to breathe?" Gasps rippled this time. Subtle, hushed, but undeniable. Richard Sr. sneered, waving his hand as if swatting away a fly. "One press release tomorrow, and your empire crumbles. Be grateful for our patience." Evelyn's lips curved not into a smile, but something heavier, a shadow of knowledge. She glanced briefly at the golden contract folder that sat on the long banquet table. Embossed with both their company logos, a $1 billion merger deal, weeks in the making, the crown jewel of the Harrington family's dominance. The orchestra faltered mid-note. Cameras on silent mode clicked discreetly from the corners of the hall. Every eye was on Evelyn. Every breath waited. She pressed one hand against the side of her face where the slap had landed. Slowly, deliberately, she placed her clutch on the table. Next to that golden folder, her voice dropped lower as though speaking only to herself, but loud enough that silence carried it through every corner of the room. "Then let's see who truly crumbles first." The chandeliers seemed to flicker. And with that, Evelyn turned not toward the contract, not toward the Harringtons, but toward the grand doors at the back of the ballroom. The sound of her heels clicking against marble was louder than the orchestra, louder than the whispers. Every step was defiance. Every step was dignity. She did not look back. But as her hand touched the golden handle of the exit, a man's voice rose from the far side of the room, low, steady, and full of something that made the Harringtons pale. "Miss Carter, if you walk out that door, the world will finally hear the truth." The entire hall froze. Even Evelyn paused, hand resting on the door dot, and the screen of silence cracked open, ready to flood. The air in the ballroom thickened, heavy as storm clouds before lightning. The chandeliers swayed slightly, as though the very building had taken a breath. Evelyn's hand still rested on the golden door handle, her back to the sea of frozen faces. That voice. It hadn't come from the Harringtons. It hadn't come from the orchestra. It had come from the far end of the room, a voice low, steady, carrying the kind of weight only truth gives. "Miss Carter," it repeated, echoing through the marble. "If you walk out that door, the world will finally hear the truth." Every guest turned. Cameras flashed, subtle but relentless. The Harringtons stiffened, eyes darting toward the source dot. It was Daniel Hughes, a quiet board member known for his silent nods and polished shoes, a man who rarely spoke at all. Tonight, he stood taller than ever, voice trembling with conviction. His words broke the contract of silence the wealthy had lived by for decades. Richard Harrington Sr. snarled, his voice slicing the tension. "Sit down, Daniel. You forget whose table you eat from." But Daniel did not sit. His hand gripped the back of his chair, knuckles white. "The world should know what happened tonight. They should know how you treat her, how you've treated countless others." Gasps rippled again. This time louder, stronger. Guests began to shift in their seats, torn between fear and conscience. Some lowered their eyes to their champagne glasses, desperate to stay invisible. But others stared openly, their faces flushed with the shame of complicity. Evelyn turned slowly, her fingers slipping from the golden handle. Her eyes met Daniel's across the hall, steady, unflinching. For the first time that night, she allowed the room to see the faintest glimmer of gratitude in her gaze. The Harrington heir, Thomas Jr., erupted. His face crimson, his voice thundered. "Enough of this. This woman is nothing without us. She is ours to make or break." The words slashed deeper than the slap. Guests recoiled, whispers hissing through the crowd like snakes. Ours. The word carried chains. Evelyn's expression did not waver. She walked back toward the banquet table, heels striking marble with unshakable rhythm. The orchestra tried to resume playing, but the violin strings trembled, discordant, unable to mask the unfolding storm. She stopped at the golden folder, the $1 billion contract resting like a crown jewel on silk. Her fingers traced its edges. She did not open it. Instead, she lifted her head, addressing the room. "You measure worth in dollars," Evelyn said, her voice calm but ringing like a bell. "I measure it in dignity. And tonight, everyone here must decide what they value more." Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Richard Sr. leaned forward, his voice seething. "You think a speech will save you? Tomorrow, every paper will print what we tell them. Every network will play our version of this story. You will disappear into a footnote." Evelyn's lips pressed into the faintest smile. "Then let them print. Let them play. Because sometimes silence is more dangerous than noise." And as if on cue, a dozen camera phones, long hidden in the glittering crowd, rose discreetly. Guests had been recording. Not just the slap, not just the words, but the humiliation, the arrogance, the truth. Richard Jr.'s face drained of color. For the first time that night, the Harrington family looked less like predators and more like prey. But Evelyn did not seize the moment with rage. She simply stood taller, the red mark on her cheek glowing beneath the chandeliers. Her eyes swept across the hall, not pleading, not commanding, but reminding every soul present that they were witnessing history. The whispers grew louder now, no longer confined to hushed corners. "Did you see?" She didn't even flinch. "They'll bury her if she stays quiet." "No, they can't, not this time." Evelyn placed the contract folder flat against the table with a quiet thud. Then she stepped back, her gown shimmering under the lights, her presence dominating the hall more than any dynasty's fortune ever could, and she spoke just one line. If you think tonight belongs to you, Harringtons, you've already lost." Gasps broke into the air. The orchestra dropped their instruments, strings snapping with sudden dissonance, and then the sound came, the heavy wooden doors of the ballroom creaking open on their own, revealing a flood of waiting journalists who had somehow slipped past the velvet ropes. Cameras flashed, microphones rose, and the Harringtons' empire began to tremble. The grand doors of the ballroom swung wider, groaning on golden hinges as a wave of cameras and microphones surged inside. Lights burst like gunfire white, relentless, blinding. The marble floor glittered under the strobe of lenses. For years, the Harrington Gala had been a fortress, velvet ropes, private guards, ironclad guest lists. Tonight, the fortress cracked. The press had slipped in like water through a broken dam, and now the flood could not be stopped. "Miss Carter. Miss Carter." Voices cried. "Did he really strike you? Is this how billion-dollar deals are made? Do you intend to walk away?" Microphones stretched toward Evelyn like arrows, but she did not flinch. She stood poised, her hands folded at her waist, gown shimmering as though woven from night itself. The red mark on her cheek glowed under the camera lights, not as a wound but as a scar of defiance. Across from her, the Harringtons unraveled. Richard Harrington Sr. slammed a fist against the banquet table. "Who let them in?" His voice cracked, no longer carrying the smooth power it once commanded. Guards scrambled toward the doors, but it was too late. Half the press corps was already live streaming. Thomas Jr., still seething, barked at the cameras. "Turn those off. You have no permission to film here." His face flushed red, sweat glistening at his temples. The more he shouted, the more the flashes captured his desperation. Evelyn finally spoke, her voice steady, calm, amplified not by microphones but by dignity. "You don't silence cameras with shouting. You silence them with truth." The words rippled through the hall, each syllable a strike against the Harrington dynasty. One journalist pushed forward, eyes sharp behind her glasses. "Miss Carter, are you ending the merger tonight?" Evelyn looked down at the golden folder on the table, untouched, gleaming under the chandeliers like a cursed treasure. Then she lifted her gaze. "Deals built on humiliation," she said, "are not deals. They're shackles. And I don't wear shackles." The ballroom erupted. Some guests clapped softly, almost apologetically, testing the air like birds checking for rain. Others gasped audibly, their loyalty to the Harringtons collapsing under the weight of shame. Richard Sr., as voice trembled with rage. "You think you can destroy us with a speech? Tomorrow the headlines will bury you. We own the papers, the networks, the money." But Daniel Hughes, still standing firm at his seat, interrupted. "Not tonight, Richard. Tonight, the world is watching for themselves." Dozens of phones lifted higher. Livestream comments flickered on journalists' screens, messages from across the globe already pouring in. "We see you. Evelyn Carter. No one deserves this. The Harrington name will never recover from this." Thomas Jr. lunged forward, pointing at the press. "Delete it, all of it. We'll sue every one of you into the ground." But the journalists only stepped closer, undeterred. Their questions cut sharper now. Why strike a woman during a business negotiation? Is this how the Harrington family handles dissent? Do you consider Miss Carter your equal or your property? The word property landed like a dagger. Thomas Jr. froze, his earlier slip, "She is ours," still echoing in digital recordings. He saw his empire crumbling not with explosions, but with words replayed millions of times online. Evelyn did not gloat. She simply let the silence after the questions hang heavy, making the Harringtons squirm. Her calmness was the loudest weapon in the room. Finally, she addressed the cameras, her voice lower now, almost intimate. "Power does not belong to those who abuse it. It belongs to those who endure it and refuse to bow." Applause broke out this time, stronger, less hesitant. A few guests rose from their seats, clapping openly, choosing sides in the battle that had just begun. Richard Sr. turned pale, veins tightening in his neck. He whispered to his son, voice cracked with panic, "Get the lawyers, now." But it was too late. The cameras had captured every tremor in his voice. every shadow of fear in his eyes. Evelyn stepped back from the banquet table, her figure bathed in a storm of flashes. She turned toward the doors once again, but this time, the journalists parted for her like the sea itself, their cameras rising higher, their voices chasing her. "Miss Carter, where will you go now? What happens to the deal? Are the Harringtons finished?" Evelyn paused at the threshold, the grand hall behind her now collapsing under its own arrogance. She glanced over her shoulder, not at the Harringtons, but at the crowd guests, journalists, silent witnesses, and with a calm smile she said, "You'll have your headline by morning." She stepped out, leaving the Harrington empire trembling in her wake. The cameras followed. The silence inside the ballroom turned into chaos, voices, shouts, and panic. But the dignity of one woman had already written the first line of their downfall. Outside the ballroom, the night had transformed into a battlefield of light. Dozens of news vans crowded the curb, satellite dishes pointed at the stars like weapons. Reporters shoved microphones forward, cameras flashing so bright the marble steps glowed as if set on fire. Evelyn descended slowly, each step deliberate. The golden gown brushed against the stone as if even fabric understood dignity. Around her, journalists shouted questions like thunder. "Did they really strike you, Miss Carter? Are you ending the billion-dollar merger? What message do you have for women watching tonight?" She didn't stop. She didn't raise her hand. Her silence was louder than answers, her calm stride more powerful than any press release. The red mark on her cheek told the story for her. Behind her, the Harrington family burst through the ballroom doors, chaos spilling onto the steps. Richard Sr. barked at guards to clear the press. Thomas Jr. shoved a camera away, his voice raw. "Shut it down. Every one of you get out." The camera stayed steady, zooming in on his rage. Microphones caught every syllable. The arrogance that once drew applause now sounded like desperation, and Evelyn, already inside her waiting car, turned only once. Through the tinted glass, she met the camera's eye. Calm, steady, defiant. Then the door closed, and the car pulled away, leaving the dynasty exposed beneath the glare. By morning, the world was ablaze. Billionaire Harringtons, humiliated black CEO at Gala, slap heard around Wall Street. Evelyn Carter walks away from $1 billion deal. Screens in airports, in subways, in crowded diners replayed the footage. Evelyn's cheek, the slap, the silence, the words, "I don't wear shackles." Every second captured, looped, dissected. In offices, employees whispered over coffee. In classrooms, teachers paused lessons as students scrolled through headlines. On social media, hashtags multiplied. Hashtag stand with Evelyn, hashtag Harrington exposed, hashtag dignity over deals, and beneath it all, a deeper murmur, questions long buried now rising. How many others had they silenced? How long had arrogance ruled unchecked? Inside the Harrington estate, panic reigned. The great dining hall, once used to host presidents, had become a war room. Newspapers littered the table, each headline sharper than the last. Richard Sr. paced the length of the room, veins bulging, face flushed. "This is an ambush," he snarled. "She planned this. Every second of it." Thomas Jr. slammed a fist against the table. "Then we'll crush her. Lawyers, judges, by the networks, by the silence." But Daniel Hughes, seated quietly at the far end, finally spoke. His tone was steady, unshaken. "You can't buy silence anymore. The world saw what you did. You can't erase it." Richard turned, fury in his eyes. "And whose side are you on, Daniel?" Daniel met his gaze without blinking. The side of truth. Silence thickened the hall. Even the servants at the edges shifted uncomfortably, their loyalty tested by the crack in the dynasty's armor. Meanwhile, Evelyn sat in her office, high above the city skyline. The floor-to-ceiling windows bathed her desk in morning light. She had not slept. She did not need to. Her assistant placed newspaper after newspaper in front of her, each headline louder than the last. Evelyn read none of them. She already knew the story. She had lived it. Instead, her eyes lingered on the golden folder that had been delivered back to her, the merger contract the Harringtons once believed she'd begged to sign. It now sat unopened on her desk, a relic of arrogance. She traced its edges with one finger, not with bitterness, but with clarity. Deals could be rebuilt. Empires could be built again. But dignity, once surrendered, could never be reclaimed. Her phone buzzed. Dozens of missed calls from networks, CEOs, leaders. Everyone wanted her statement. Everyone wanted her voice, but Evelyn wasn't rushing. Timing was power. And silence, when chosen, was louder than any speech. She turned to her assistant. "Draft a statement." "Yes, Ms. Carter. What should it say?" Evelyn leaned back, eyes still on the unopened folder. A faint smile touched her lips. "Tell them," she said, "that the deal was never worth the price of respect." Her assistant froze, goosebumps rising. Then she nodded, typing swiftly, knowing history was being written. Evelyn rose, walking to the window. The city sprawled beneath her, alive, buzzing with headlines, conversations. "Hope," she whispered to herself, almost too soft to hear. "They thought they broke me. They only built me higher." And as her reflection stared back from the glass calm, dignified, unshaken, the Harrington Empire, miles away, began to crumble under the weight of its own silence. The Harrington headquarters towered above, the city like a monument of untouchable wealth. Its steel and glass walls had reflected decades of victories, swallowing scandals before they reached daylight. But today, the reflection trembled. The boardroom was filled with silence sharper than glass. A long mahogany table stretched across the room, lined with men and women whose suits cost more than most homes. They had always nodded when Richard Harrington Sr. spoke. Today, they avoided his eyes. Richard slammed a newspaper down on the table. The headline screamed in bold letters, "The Slap That Shook Wall Street." Beside it, Evelyn's face stared back calm, regal, unbroken. The bruise on her cheek had become an icon, splashed across screens and billboards around the globe. "This is a media circus," Richard growled. "By next week, it will fade." But one board member cleared his throat. "With respect, sir, it won't fade. The footage has over 200 million views in less than 24 hours. The words landed like stones in a glass pond. Murmurs rippled through the room. Some faces were pale with fear, others with shame. Thomas Jr. leaned forward, fists clenched. "Then we fight harder, countersue, call in favors. Crush her." Another voice rose, this time firm, not fearful. It was Elaine Morgan, a senior board member rarely heard in these meetings. "Crush her? She's already won. Public opinion is against us. Investors are calling me, asking if we've lost our minds. They don't want their names tied to this family anymore." Richard turned to her, eyes narrowing. "Investors will do what I tell them. They always have." But Elaine didn't flinch. "Not anymore." Silence fell heavy again. At the far end of the table, Daniel Hughes spoke softly, the same voice that had cut through the gala. "You cannot slap dignity out of someone and expect the world to look away. Evelyn Carter is not just a woman you humiliated, she's a leader. And now she's a symbol." The word hung in the air, symbol. Richard's jaw tightened, but for the first time, he did not snap back. He saw it too. Evelyn's calm defiance had spread beyond one deal. She had become a mirror, and in that mirror, the Harrington dynasty looked monstrous. Across town, Evelyn sat in a glass conference room of her own. But here, the mood was different. Reporters filled the lobby outside. Phones buzzed nonstop. But inside, her team leaned forward, faces lit with fire. Ms. Carter, her communications director, said, "Social media support has skyrocketed. Overnight, you've gained over 20 million followers. Celebrities, CEOs, even world leaders are posting in your support." Another added, "Your refusal to retaliate directly, that silence, it's driving them crazy." "People see strength in it." Evelyn listened quietly, fingers steepled beneath her chin. She wasn't celebrating. She was calculating. "This isn't about followers," she said softly. "It's about what comes next. They expected me to beg for their deal. Instead, I walked away. That leaves a question the world will demand answered. What will I build now?" Her team exchanged glances, realizing the scale of her vision. Evelyn rose, walking to the window. The skyline glittered beneath the morning sun. They tried to brand me with humiliation, but they forgot brands can be rebuilt. Empires can rise from defiance. Her words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. The room felt them as if spoken through the bones. Back in the Harrington Tower, the rebellion spread. A board member leaned toward Richard, voice firm. If you don't step down as public face, shareholders will demand it. We can't afford this backlash. Richard slammed his hand against the table, but the sound no longer carried authority. It carried desperation. You think she can topple me? He hissed. I've crushed bigger threats than Evelyn Carter. Daniel's calm voice returned. And yet, none of them had the world watching. For the first time, Richard Harrington Sr. had no reply. By evening, the contrast was complete. News outlets showed split screens. On one side, Evelyn, serene and composed, leaving her office with staff surrounding her like a quiet army. On the other, the Harringtons, shouting at cameras, faces twisted with anger. Their empire cracking in real time. Evelyn did not need to declare war. The war had already begun, fought not with fists, but with images, words, and silence. And in boardrooms across the nation, other CEOs watched closely. They saw a dynasty fall. They saw dignity rise. And they began to ask themselves who they wanted to stand beside when history turned its gaze on them. The sun had barely risen when the story crossed oceans. In London, commuters reading the morning paper stared at the headline, American billionaire family slaps black CEO at Gala. In Paris, cafe patrons scrolled through their phones, murmuring in disbelief as Evelyn's calm, unbroken gaze appeared on every feed. In Johannesburg, a news anchor's voice rang over televisions in crowded markets. What happened last night in New York is not just an insult to one woman, it's an insult to dignity everywhere. The footage of the slap, Evelyn's silence, and her words, I don't wear shackles, spread like wildfire. Subtitled in dozens of languages, carried into living rooms across continents. Corporations began to act out. A global tech giant announced it was suspending all negotiations with it. Harrington Group, pending internal review. Banks in Europe froze joint ventures. Even politicians, once eager to dine at the Harrington table, issued carefully crafted statements of concern. The dynasty that once pulled strings now found its phone lines flooded with cancellations. Inside their Manhattan tower, the Harrington boardroom reeked of fear. Screens lined the walls, each broadcasting live coverage. Evelyn's face alongside collapsing stock prices. This is unsustainable, Elaine Morgan declared, her tone clipped. Shares dropped another 12% overnight. Investors are pulling billions. The name Harrington is poison. Richard Sr. slammed his cane against the floor. This family built empires before Evelyn Carter was even born. We'll outlast her, but Thomas Jr. paled at his tablet screen. We've lost the Dubai contract. And Singapore. They don't want our name anywhere near their markets. The words struck harder than the headlines. For the first time, the Harringtons were not feared, they were avoided. Meanwhile, Evelyn Carter sat quietly in her office, blinds half open, watching the city hum below. She hadn't spoken publicly since the gala. Her silence had become strategy. On social media, hashtags swelled. Hashtag We Are Evelyn trended across continents. Protesters gathered outside Harrington offices, holding placards, dignity over dollars, respect is priceless. Her assistant entered, phone in hand. Ms. Carter, you're being invited to address the United Nations Business Ethics Forum. They want you as keynote speaker. Evelyn didn't look surprised. She only asked, when? Next week. They say the world needs your voice now. Evelyn turned from the window, eyes calm. Then I'll give them more than my voice. I'll give them a choice. That evening, the Harringtons tried to seize control with a press conference. Cameras flashed as Richard Sr., flanked by Thomas Jr., stepped behind the podium. He began with a tight smile. Last night was a misunderstanding. We have always respected Miss Carter and her contributions. Our family values diversity. The crowd erupted with shouted questions. Is this how you define respect? Why did your son strike her? Do you deny using the word ours? Thomas Jr. lost his temper. His voice thundered. She provoked us. She thinks she can stand above this family, above everything we built. The room gasped. The microphones caught every word. Cameras replayed his rage in slow motion. Within minutes, the footage streamed worldwide. Headlines followed. Harrington heir doubles down on arrogance. No regret, no apology. The press conference meant to restore their power had only deepened the wound. Back at Evelyn's office, her staff watched the footage live. Cheers erupted as Thomas Jr. buried himself with his own arrogance. Her communications director grinned. They've destroyed themselves. You won without lifting a hand. But Evelyn raised her palm gently, silencing the room. Her tone was measured, thoughtful. No, she said softly. This isn't about their destruction. It's about building something better. The world is watching me now. If I waste this moment on revenge, then I become numb. My dignity must serve more than my pride. Her words sank into her team like scripture. They realized she wasn't just surviving a scandal, she was rewriting the rules of power. And so, by nightfall, the world had taken sides. The Harrington name became a cautionary tale. Evelyn Carter became a symbol. But in the shadows of the Harrington estate, Richard Sr. whispered to his son, voice cold as stone, she thinks she's won. But she doesn't know what we're capable of. If we fall, we'll drag her down with us. His words coiled like snakes in the dark. Midnight cloaked the Harrington estate in silence. But inside the oak-paneled war room, the dynasty plotted like cornered animals. Richard Sr. leaned forward, his cane tapping the hardwood table with restless precision. We are not finished. She's a symbol now, yes, but symbols can be broken. Elaine Morgan, the razor-sharp family attorney, slid a folder across the table. We've begun digging. Every business partner she's ever had, every rumor, every personal detail. If we can't silence her with apology, we'll smear her reputation until she drowns in doubt. Thomas Jr., his pride still throbbing from humiliation, sneered. Let's not stop at rumors. We control banks, media outlets, lobbyists. One call and contracts vanish. One article and her so-called empire crumbles. Richard Sr.'s eyes glittered. Then do it. Burn everything she's built. By dawn, whispers spread. Anonymous tips reached newspapers hinting at irregularities in Evelyn's early contracts. Talk shows hosted panels questioning if she was truly qualified or just a diversity hire elevated too quickly. News anchors spoke carefully, balancing words like knives. Brilliant CEO or manufactured figurehead? It was the same old playbook, the quiet assassination of reputation. But this time, the world was watching more closely than the Harringtons imagined. Inside her office, Evelyn's staff gathered, anxious faces lit by phone screens. They're coming after you, her assistant said, sliding headlines across the desk. They're painting you as a fraud. Evelyn sat in silence, her posture regal, her hands folded as though she had expected this moment all along. Her voice was soft, steady. Of course they are. When arrogance loses power, it hides behind poison. But poison only works if you drink it. Her team exchanged confused glances. So, what do we do? Evelyn rose and walked to the window. The city stretched endlessly before her, skyscrapers gleaming in the autumn light. We don't defend lies. We tell truth. We don't scramble to survive. We stand so still that the storm breaks itself. She turned, her eyes sharp with resolve. Prepare the documents. Every audit, every record, every contract, release them all. Let them search and find nothing but integrity. And so it began. Within 24 hours, Evelyn's company publicly disclosed a complete financial audit signed by international regulators. Her contracts, transparent and clean, were published online for the world to see. Reporters flipped through the files live on air, astonished. We've never seen a corporation this transparent, one said. The Harrington smear collapsed before it. Could take root. But Evelyn wasn't finished. She stepped into the public eye with a press statement broadcast globally. Standing at a podium, she addressed the world with poise. They struck me because they believed power meant ownership. Now they strike with lies because they believe silence means surrender. Let me be clear. I do not belong to them. I do not belong to anyone. I belong to the future. Her words soared across nations. Crowds erupted in applause. Protesters carried her face on banners, chanting her name. For every smear headline, 10 voices rose in defense. Back at the Harrington estate, the family watched in stunned silence as Evelyn's response turned their venom into her victory. Thomas Jr. slammed his fist against the table. How does she keep winning? We throw fire and she turns it into light. Elaine muttered, because she's not playing the same game. She's rewriting the rules. Richard Sr. gripped his cane tightly, his pride twisting into rage. Then we changed the board itself. No more whispers. No more shadows. If she wants war, we'll give her war. His voice dropped to a chilling whisper. We'll drag her into the halls of power where rules bend, where money writes laws. If she wants dignity, let's see if it can survive corruption. That night, Evelyn returned home to her quiet penthouse. The city below shimmered with life, unaware of the storm still brewing. She poured herself tea, sat in stillness, and whispered a line to herself. Not as a speech, but as a promise. They don't see it yet. This isn't about me. It's about all of us. And the more they fight me, the clearer the truth becomes. She closed her eyes, serene amid the chaos, already knowing the Harringtons' next move. Power doesn't always roar in public. Sometimes it whispers in marble hallways. And the Harringtons had been whispering for decades. In Washington, a senator leaned across a mahogany desk, his smile thin as paper. The Harringtons have always been generous donors. If they want an investigation into Evelyn Carter's company, consider it done. In London, a regulator received a discreet phone call. Pause her contracts. We'll make it worth your while. Across boardrooms, lobbyists slipped envelopes, lawyers drafted letters, and suddenly Evelyn's company faced an avalanche. Contracts suspended. Government inquiries launched. Banking partners hesitant. The Harringtons had flipped the chessboard, using institutions themselves as weapons. News anchors declared, Evelyn Carter faces multiple investigations. Is the rising star in trouble? Talk shows echoed. Brilliant leader or corporate fraud? The world that had cheered her now hesitated. Doubt began to spread not because of truth, but because the system itself demanded it. Inside her office, Evelyn's staff panicked. Papers littered the conference table, legal notices, contract suspensions, subpoenas stamped in red. Her communications director slammed a folder shut. They've weaponized everything. Regulators, banks, politicians, they're strangling us. Her assistant's voice cracked. If this continues, we could lose everything in weeks. Evelyn sat in silence, the weight of the storm pressing against her, yet her composure unbroken. She traced the rim of her teacup, eyes distant, thoughtful. Finally, she spoke. Do you hear it? The room fell silent. Hear what? Someone asked. Evelyn's gaze sharpened. The system groaning under its own rot. Every move they make exposes their corruption. They think they're burying me, but they're digging their own grave. Her team stared at her in disbelief. But how do we fight? They control the law. The banks. The regulators. Evelyn rose, her posture commanding. Then we don't fight in silence. We shine a light so bright the world sees every hand, every deal, every whispered favor. We expose the system, not just the family. She placed her hands on the table. Prepare everything. Record the calls, the letters, the sudden suspensions. Document it all. If they want war, let them write their confession with every action. Within days, Evelyn moved her battle from boardrooms to the global stage. She held a press conference, broadcast live from a crowded hall in New York. Cameras clicked as she stepped to the podium, dressed not in power suits but in a simple dark dress that emphasized gravity, not glamour. Her voice rang clear. I am under investigation. Not because I have sinned, but because I refuse to bow. Every contract they suspend, every inquiry they launch, every shadow they cast, it tells a story, not of my corruption, but of theirs. This is not Evelyn Carter versus the Harringtons. This is dignity versus the system that protects arrogance. The hall erupted in applause. Journalists leaned forward, scribbling every word. Back at the Harrington estate, Richard Sr. watched on television, fury tightening his jaw. She dares to turn institutions against themselves? He growled. Elaine Morgan shook her head, her voice low. She's not fighting us anymore. She's fighting the system itself. That's far more dangerous. Thomas Jr. slammed the remote down. Then we crush her faster. If the system bends for us, it can break her completely. Richard Sr.'s eyes glinted. Yes, but remember, systems don't collapse quietly. If she keeps pushing, it won't just be us that falls. It will be the walls we built. His voice dropped into a chilling whisper. And some walls are not meant to break. That night, Evelyn sat alone by her window. The city a glittering ocean beneath her. The storm had never been greater. Yet she felt strangely calm. Her reflection in the glass seemed to whisper back at her. This was never about survival. This was about revelation. She lifted her teacup and spoke softly into the silence. They wanted to remind the world who holds the chains. I'll remind the world chains can be broken. It began as whispers, then chants, then a thunder that shook cities. From New York to Nairobi, crowds filled the streets. Placards painted in bold colors read, "No more chains. Dignity over dollars. We are Evelyn." What had started as Evelyn's defense now swelled into a global cry against corruption. Students marched alongside workers, activists with business leaders, all repeating the same demand: transparency, equality, justice. Television screens broadcast rivers of people moving as one. The chants echoed through boulevards, bridges, and town squares. The Harringtons watched in horror from their mansion as helicopters filmed the protests overhead. For the first time, the family that had bought silence was confronted by voices money could not mute. Inside the estate's marble hall, tension hung thick. Thomas Jr. paced furiously. This is chaos. How can one woman rally the world against us? Elaine Morgan's tone was cold. It's not one woman. It's every voice that's ever been silenced by power like yours. Evelyn is just the spark. Richard Sr. sat motionless in his chair, his hands gripping his cane until his knuckles whitened. We built this dynasty on control. If the system turns against us, then everything collapses. Elaine's words sliced through the room. It already has. Governments that once courted the Harringtons now issued public condemnations. The slap was not just an insult to Evelyn Carter, declared a European Prime Minister at a press briefing. It was an insult to the principle of equality. Corporations announced they were terminating Harrington partnerships. Banks severed credit lines. Even their oldest allies abandoned them, afraid to drown with the sinking empire. The dynasty's power, once untouchable, bled out in front of the world. Meanwhile, Evelyn Carter stood on a platform in Washington, addressing a sea of thousands gathered under the shadow of the Capitol. Her voice rose steady and resolute over the roar of the crowd. They thought dignity could be slapped away. They thought truth could be buried in shadows. But today, you prove them wrong. Today, the world shows that corruption cannot silence the human spirit. The crowd erupted, chanting her name. Cameras captured faces streaked with tears, fists lifted high, strangers embracing. It was more than Evelyn's fight, it was their own battle given voice. Inside her office later that evening, Evelyn's team watched footage of the protests flooding every news channel. Her communications director whispered, almost in disbelief, "You've done it. You didn't just survive, you've changed the game. You've turned a slap into a revolution." Evelyn shook her head gently. "I didn't change the game. People did. All I did was refuse to bow." Her assistant asked softly, "And the Harringtons? What happens to them now?" Evelyn looked out the window, the chant still echoing faintly through the city streets. They'll face what every empire of arrogance faces, the moment when power learns it cannot buy respect. Back in the Harrington estate, cracks deepened. Phone lines buzzed with resignations. Board members fled. Partners vanished. Their stock plummeted so fast analysts called it a freefall. Thomas Jr., red-faced, screamed at his father, "Do something! Say something! We can't just sit here and watch it all burn. Richard Sr. finally rose, his voice hoarse with defeat. It's over. For a moment, even Thomas Jr. fell silent. The patriarch who had built an empire with iron fists now stood trembling, his legacy collapsing like ash in the wind. Late at night, alone in his study, Richard Sr. watched the footage replay on television, Evelyn standing calm, dignified, as the world rallied behind her. He whispered bitterly to the empty room, "She was supposed to be ours. Now she owns the world." His cane slipped from his grasp, clattering against the marble floor, a sound like the final toll of an era ending. Evelyn, meanwhile, sat quietly with a notebook in her lap. She did not celebrate, did not gloat. She simply wrote one line across the page. "Power is nothing without respect." She closed the notebook, her calm presence a sharp contrast to the storm she had unleashed. The Harrington name once glittered like gold, etched into skyscrapers, engraved on university wings, whispered in the halls of power. Now it was a curse. Within weeks, the empire crumbled. Banks seized assets. Stockholders demanded resignations. International courts opened inquiries into decades of corruption. The mansion that once hosted presidents stood silent, its iron gates locked, its windows dark. The dynasty, built over generations, had fallen in less than a season. Thomas Jr. wandered the deserted estate like a ghost, his voice breaking in rage and disbelief. We were untouchable. How could one woman cut him off, her suitcase in hand? Not one woman. The truth. And you handed it to her with every act of arrogance. She left without looking back, her heels echoing like the closing of a chapter. Richard Sr. sat slumped in his study, cane resting uselessly beside him. His empire gone, his name in ruins, he muttered to himself, "Power is nothing without respect." The words tasted bitter, stolen from the very woman he had tried to destroy. Meanwhile, the world's attention shifted to Evelyn Carter. She stood at the United Nations Business Ethics Forum, the same invitation she had once received with hesitation. Now, she was not just a keynote speaker, she was the voice of a movement. The hall was filled with leaders, activists, CEOs, and citizens from every continent. Cameras flashed, but Evelyn remained composed, her voice carrying clarity that silenced the room. They slapped me because they thought my dignity could be taken. They smeared me because they thought truth could be buried. But what they did not understand is this: dignity is not given. It is lived. And when one person refuses to bow, it gives others the strength to stand. Applause thundered through the chamber. Delegates rose to their feet, some with tears in their eyes. The speech was replayed across every major channel, translated into dozens of languages. Back in New York, murals of Evelyn appeared on city walls. Children wore shirts with her image and the words, "Respect is priceless." Protesters carried her quotes as banners. For many, she was no longer just a CEO, she was a symbol of resistance against every chain arrogance tried to place on humanity. Assistant asked her quietly one evening, as they watched news coverage of candlelight vigils held in her honor across continents, "How does it feel, knowing you've become history?" Evelyn smiled faintly, her eyes calm. "History isn't about me. It's about the people who finally saw themselves in my silence, in my refusal to bow. If I am remembered, let it not be for surviving a slap, but for showing that dignity endures." And so, while the Harrington name sank into disgrace, Evelyn Carter's name rose into legacy. Books were written. Universities taught her story. Movements carried her words. In boardrooms and parliaments, people asked, what would Evelyn do? Her quiet defiance had become a compass. One final image lingered in the world's collective memory. At a charity gala a year later, not one hosted by dynasties but by communities, Evelyn attended in a simple gown. Cameras caught her pausing by the entrance, smiling softly as she placed her hand on the shoulder of a young black girl staring up at her with wide eyes. "Is it true?" the girl asked shyly. "That they tried to own you?" Evelyn bent down, her voice warm but steady. "No one owns you. Not if you remember who you are." The child's smile widened, a spark lighting in her eyes. The cameras flashed, capturing a moment that would outlast even Evelyn herself. Far away, In the shadows of their crumbling mansion, Richard Sr. watched the image on television. His empire gone, his legacy shattered, he whispered into the silence, "She won." Not just over us, but over the world. The screen flickered. The lights dimmed. And with them, the last breath of the Harrington dynasty. Evelyn Carter did not mark her victory with vengeance, nor with arrogance. She walked forward with quiet strength, her dignity intact, her legacy eternal. Because in the end, money could collapse, dynasties could fall, but dignity outlived them all.